We talked about ways to make our music sound a little richer and fuller by adding some color notes, and we're going to stay in the key of C to make this simpler. But when we have a C chord that we're assigned in our music, whether it's written music or whether we're playing by ear, if we're resting on a C chord, that's a nice sound, but it is a very simple sound, which for many types of music is not only adequate but appropriate. It's just some music doesn't require any sort of special spices. But if we do choose to add other notes to our C chord to give it some color, there are a couple of ways that we can do that. We can, first of all, we can add additional notes. Now, if a C chord is a C chord, which consists of a C and an E and a G, what other notes can I add? Well, that decision needs to be made with a focus on what chord is coming next in the music. Because some chord additions that we make to our simple triads will be leading notes. In other words, if I add, for example, a B flat to the C chord, which is the dominant 7, that leads the ear to want to hear an F chord next. So C, C7. So dominant 7ths or flatted 7ths make the ear want to resolve that little bit of dissonance there by going to a chord 4 steps up. In the case of C, it would be going to F. So here's C, E, G, here's the B flat, and that resolves itself in our ear to an F chord. So if you have a C chord and you want to add a note or two to it to give it some fullness, if your next chord is F, then depending on how long that C chord is lasting in the music, right before you get to the F chord, you can replace the regular C with the C7, and then it will take you to the F. Now, we'll talk about that later on, because what's really happening there is there's a momentary key shift in our brain, and this B flat is really a suspended 4 in the key of F, but that's too much information for right now. So that's called a leading tone, because it leads us to a certain resolution, C to F. In the case of F, okay, if F is my tonal center, if I play an F dominant 7, which is F, A, C, E flat, that wants to resolve to a B flat, which is 4 steps up the F scale. Same thing with G. If I'm in the key of G, and I play a G7, which is adding that F, the next chord that our ear wants to hear is going to be 4 steps up the G scale, which is C. And it's a perfectly natural thing. So that is a leading tone. But if I don't want to be obligated to go to any next chord, there are certain safe notes that can be added to chords to make them prettier, but with no obligation or indication as to what may be coming next. For example, if I play the C chord here, one of the safest notes you can add for color is the 2, and the 2 is simply the second note of the scale of whatever the chord that is. So in this case, it's a D. Now, some people might call that a 9 chord, but a 9 chord implies that there's a 7th in there somewhere, because you can't get to the subsequent levels of chords. If I'm going to play a 9 chord, it has to include a 7. If I'm going to play an 11 chord, it has to include a 9 and a 7. If I just call it a 2 chord, I'm simply adding the second note of the scale to the chord, and it's kind of pretty. It's a little bit of an unresolved sound, but it's pretty contemporary sounding. To give you an example, I'm going to change to an electronic piano sound to give you an idea of how often you hear this and maybe don't even realize that you're hearing it. It's in all sorts of contemporary music. Here's a C chord. Here I'm going to add the 2. Let's get rid of that phaser. Okay, and that's a pretty sound. It's kind of a contemporary sound. This note really doesn't belong in a C chord, but it's a safe note. If I played that dominant 7th, it's going to suggest to my ear to expect an F chord next. So I'm going to play it safe with the D. And I like to group those notes, those color notes like that, into what we call chord clusters, which are where we take a fairly complex, long, drawn-out chord. And if we played it in order that we discovered the notes in, it would cover a wide area. But we push it together. So instead of playing C, E, G, C, D, up there like that, stretching it all out, I keep it right here together. So let me give you a few of these in a row. It's really nice when you have a bass sound that you can split your keyboard if you have that opportunity. So it gives you a real defined tonal center. So when you hear this, instead of hearing it just with piano, you can hear a bass in that left hand. So therefore I don't have to play it here because I've got it down here. Or you can play it. So it's really a pretty sound. It's very contemporary, very easy listening type of a thing. You'll notice that I broke it up a little bit sometimes. Instead of just plopping down the chord, I want to be sure all the notes are really clear to the listener. So I'll if you arpeggiate them a little bit, in other words, break them up and play them individually with the sustain pedal on, all the notes will play at the same time, but you striking them individually kind of calls attention to it, which is kind of a nice thing. Another safe chord, safe note to add to a chord in most cases, my second favorite would be the 6th. The 6th in the case of C is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to be the A note. So I can take a C chord. Here's an F with a 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's not leading, it's just it adds a little color. It's more colorful than just the G. Now, the 6th chord is associated sometimes with more entertaining music. Used to be, you'd hear a lot of that type of harmony with the 6th in old school jazz or Dixieland. And that's 6, which is still safe, but it does have a little bit of a jazzy tonality to it. Let's talk about minor chords. Let's go back to the 2 again. Now, if I have a C chord and I decide to spice it up by adding a D, that sounds great. It's a C2 chord. But what if it's a C minor chord? Can we still use the 2? Because that would create that sound, which isolated like that is pretty awful. But if I mix it in in a chord cluster, it's intentionally dissonant. You do have that half step, which is one of the most uncomfortable intervals on the musical scale. But a lot of times I will add a 2, sometimes with a dominant 7, because it's not quite so leading with that 2 added in there. But with minor, it really isn't leading at all. So if I take my C chord, C, E flat, G, and I play a B flat, which is the dominant 7th. But if I play the second of a C minor, which is the same as the second of a C major. It's that D. So yes, I have this going. But if you put the right bass with that, and because when the listener hears a B flat and a D and an E flat and a G, it has a hard time finding a tonal center. What's the root of that chord? And if you simply have that in your bass, so that's kind of a nice effect. And that's really technically an unpleasant sound, but it's surrounded by things that make it sound a little bit more palatable. So again, a 2 is a good, safe thing, and a 6th also. Now, what about a minor 6th? Also very safe. The two safest additive notes, in other words, notes that you can add to a triad to thicken it, are the 2 and the 6th. Some others are safe in some cases, but these are 2 you can always count on. So here's a C minor chord. Okay, and I'm going to add the 6th. Kind of a nice sound. Almost reminds me of like an old detective show or something from television. It's a little bit of tension there because it's minor, but that 6th thickens it up a little bit. So there's all sorts of things that you can do. You can try a second. If you're deciding to add, in some cases, a major 7th would be another note. It's not quite as all-around friendly as the 2nd and the 6th, but in some cases you can add it. The only time I would suggest being careful about the major 7th, which is the naturally occurring 7th in the chord, is depending on what the melody is. If the melody in the song is a lot of the root note and you're playing that major 7th with it, you're going to get that again. But it's all about spacing. So here's a C triad. Here's the major 7th. It's pretty safe. It's definitely not a leading chord. It doesn't really lead you anywhere. It's kind of, I always thought of this as the carpenter's chord or the easy listening chord. It's a nice ballad sound. And so we can play it as the 7th on top of that, but let's make it into a chord cluster. Let's smush it all together. So I'm going to play the B, which is the major 7th, and the E and the G, and instead of playing the C here, I've got it in my root. So that's kind of a nice sound. And of course, you can use more than one additive note at a time. The 2, which is the universal easiest note to get along with in any chord progression, that pairs nicely with the major 7. Okay? And the reason it sounds good is because our ear is really relying on this rock bed of a C. Okay, I could play any other note technically in the bass that's in the chord, but it would change the feel of it. See, there's the playing the B, playing the D. Still sounds okay, but it's not a C chord. Here's the E, not so good. And that's really a whole different sound. So if I stay here, my ear understands that the root of this chord, the tonic, the home plate, so to speak, is C. And the notes of the C chord, the rest of them are here. We have the E and the G, and we've added a 2, we've added a major 7. Now, one more very uncommon variety here is to play a minor chord, like a C minor, and play the major 7th along with the minor chord. It's called a minor major 7. That's how it's written in the music. You'll see, for example, C minor with a little m, and then it'll have the abbreviation MAJ, and then a little 7. If you don't see the MAJ, you'll see the the triangle, which is will indicate a major 7, meaning that it's not the dominant 7. It's just one step below the root. So let's say I take this this minor chord, okay, and I add. I'm taking the bass out and playing it down here, and a third note now is going to be the major 7. It's very detective story to me. I know I keep saying that, but it just sounds to me like a whodunit mystery sound. And here again, we can add the 2. And it could be the end of a ballad, but it's definitely got that minor, saddish, mysterious sort of a sound, as opposed to the C major 9. And by the way, these chords where I'm including the 7, it's not the same as a dominant 7. If you see the chord notation C7, it always indicates that that's the 7th note of the scale flat at a half step. But if you see, for example, C Maj or C triangle or delta 7, it means to play the 7th note of the scale as it naturally occurs. So it's going to be here. And then if I add that 2, it's really not a 2 anymore. This becomes a C major 9, which means a C chord plus a major 7 plus a 9. So you might see it written like that because they're not going to write C2 plus major 7. It's just too complicated. Because a 9 chord is the same note. The 9th note is going to be a D, whether it's a 2 or a 9. The difference is when it's called a 9, it means there's a 7th in there as well. So I explained that earlier, and it's pretty simple. So have some fun with this. Remember, you'll enjoy it a lot more if you play in the sweet spot of the piano. Right in that alto tenor section. If you're practicing this and trying this out up high, it's a little wary because you can't really get that deep blend of those slower sound waves. And if you play it too low, low notes mixed together don't play well. So right in the middle, for example, here's a beautiful A minor 2. There's my 2. 1, 2. So it sounds nice in the middle there, and don't look for the perfect sweet Leave It to Beaver major chord. You're going to hear some things in there that are a little bit dissonant, but they're that way on purpose. Hope you enjoyed this. It's been Tripp Harrison. Like and subscribe. See you on another video.